New in-depth research into the experience of single parents paints a picture of discrimination and stigma, with many saying when they asked government agencies for protection, they ended up being investigated.
I had fled and left everything behind, so I had no clothing, I had a 10-week-old baby, had no money in the account.
67% of low-income single mothers said they had been treated unfairly or discriminated against. 32% said that this had been at the hands of work and income.
So a lot of times people will be like, well, that was your fault, you're actually entitled to this and you should have looked into it. But if you don't know that it exists, you don't know where to look to even begin to start.
Single parents also reported discrimination by landlords, employers, real estate agents and schools.
I would ring up, try and find out where the property was and what time it was, and they would vet me. And when they found out I was a single mum, they would tell me that the house wasn't for me, and they refused to tell me what time or whereabouts the viewing was. So I couldn't even apply for those properties.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, the stigma and discrimination that still faces solo parents. You'd have thought those days were over, but they're not.
I was raised by a single mother in the 1970s and have strong experience or memories of the stigma that we confronted. And I truly thought that we had moved beyond that, and it seems that we have not.
That's Tanya Dommett from the Mako Mama Mangapare Project, a major new report on the country's single parents. The work was carried out by Project Gender in conjunction with Ngāti Kahungunu. Its authors say a fundamental shift is required in how the government, businesses and society think about and engage with single parents. Some of the changes they're asking for are big and would need new legislation, but some are ridiculously simple, like removing the requirement for two parents to sign approval for a KiwiSaver account for their children.
Often people become single parents due to some kind of family trauma or some kind of family violence. And so often it's really hard to get two parents to sign, and can be used as a kind of weapon. So let's just get rid of that. Like, why do we have to have two parents to sign it? That seems pretty kind of like 1950s,
Angela Meyer is the director of Project Gender.
We were approached by the Peter Mackenzie Trust and we were commissioned to do this piece of work about how do we actually find out what the sector and single parents need and want in order to thrive in this country.
Were you expecting to find such an avalanche of, in this day and age, still stigmatised people?
To be honest, I was really surprised by the level of discrimination and stigma that single parents face across all aspects of their life. Obviously, when the DPB came out, there was a lot of, spying on people and calling the authorities on, women who had men in their house or gentlemen callers, that type of thing. But I was genuinely surprised by how deep that stigma still is and how pervasive it is in not only society, but also in how our systems are actually developed in terms of legislation as well.
But we have a situation where what's the percentage? Is it 1 in 3 relationships break up? Yeah,
it's a really high percentage. 20% of New Zealand families are single parent whānau. There's, 70,000, over 70,000 single parents receiving the single parent benefit in this country. So it's not insignificant.
And I know men are included in this, but you'd say the vast majority are women.
Absolutely, yeah. And that comes down to the way in which childcare is very much gendered in our society. And so, the majority of single parent whānau are women, absolutely, yeah.
So tell me how you went about collecting this information.
So what we did was we developed a really amazing survey that Tanya Dommett, our head of research, developed, and then we went out with Erin Jackson, who's one of our directors at Project Gender, and we went out all through our different channels and worked with lots of other different organisations. We did some media around it, and we also made it as accessible as possible. So in the survey design, we worked with a lot of single parents and said, is there anything else that we need to really make sure that we ask in this survey? And then we also ran different focus groups around the motu, which were very well attended.
Yeah. Now, one of those people in one of those focus groups was Emma Donnelly, who I've also spoke to, and She talked about the interagency communication lacking and how difficult that makes it for solo mums to negotiate their way around the system.
One of the harder ones was being on a social welfare system. It's not tailored to individuals. The departments don't interrelate or they don't communicate between each other, and they kind of set you up in a system to fail.
Is this surely something that should have been tidied up years ago?
In a word, yes. We heard from a lot of single parents saying that one of the things that is most difficult is, the navigating of the system. And so that can be from, when you have a child, you don't just interact with one agency, you interact with a lot of agencies. Life is all about lots of different agencies. And we were really surprised by how often you might, for example, be flagged in the system. And so that sort of whakapapa of your single parentness actually is kind of across the whole system.
So you're flagged as a solo parent?
Yeah, often you are, yeah. And all the stigma that comes with that.
And the other thing is that the WINS system, in spite of the fact that there is a benefit for solo mothers, doesn't appear to value children. I mean, the idea seems to be that you get back to part-time work, then full-time work. Why is there not this recognition that children are precious and need mum time?
That is a great and big question. I think a lot of it does come down to the gendered ideas of who looks after children, and that, women's work is often not valued. And so, this idea that you're lucky to get a little, here's some money, you can stay home for a bit, but we need you back in paid employment. And when we were working in our stakeholder hui around developing, our 82 recommendations, one of the things that was really strong in that was that children actually are this very precious commodity. We do have a falling birth rate. And why is it that they are not the centre of all of our decision making? And this idea that, you as mothers, as parents, should really be back in the paid workforce, but also we don't have childcare support. So for a single parent to be able to go back into the paid workforce, there needs to be childcare and childcare subsidies, and employers to actually really understand that and be, lean into flexibility. But that's often not there.
And it's the little things too. I mean, I saw in your recommendations you should allow parents to bring in their children to WINS interviews. Yeah. And that strikes me as crazy. You're a single mum and you can't bring your child to work and income. Yeah,
we heard that from a lot of our single parents, that they would then have to find childcare to go into work and income to talk about how they were going to get into paid work, and you cannot even bring your children. So it sort of highlights how, unless you have this kind of lens where you're thinking about what does it actually mean to be a single parent, what are all of those barriers to being a single parent in terms of how we interact with the world, it's very easy to just be like, okay, well, the blanket rule is no children allowed at the interviews. But actually we need to kind of think about, walk in the shoes of single parents and go, well, who's going to look after these children?
Yeah, and I mean, if they don't have grandma to dump the kid on.
Yeah, which also speaks to the whole kind of gendered idea of who looks after children. It's like, oh, well, then your parents will look after them. And a lot of parents, a lot of our single parents may not be living close to their family or to their whānau, which makes, again, it's a very isolating experience for a lot of single parents, yeah.
Childcare is a huge issue, and certainly it was for Emma Donnelly, who ended up going into debt when her childcare cost more than she earned.
I couldn't actually cover the bills with what I was being paid. I was like, how do people live off this? I literally can't afford to eat on this, which was insane. And so I got work, but by getting work, so they only give you 9 hours childcare at the beginning for free or subsidised care, and then anything over $200 is secondary tax. So it's actually not worth your while really earning. For me, it was over about 10 hours a week, because at that point I would get secondary tax plus have to pay full amounts for childcare, which ate away my entire pay. So I actually ended up worse off. So if I got a shift that was 12 hours, I had less money than if I just hadn't worked that week.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So it's kind of set up so that you go into part-time work and then they really just want you back into full-time work. But they make it really hard because when you've got such a young baby, you can't afford childcare like that, and there isn't childcare options to subsidise that many hours. And if there are, they don't tell you about it and they don't help you with it. And you might have, say, a caseworker that you build a relationship with at MSD, but they don't connect to the child supports or the childcare services. It's a completely different department that don't communicate. So you're transferred to somebody else who doesn't know you and doesn't really care. And then if you enter in an incorrect amount or something changes in the week, so I was doing waitressing, so my shifts changed every week at what I earned. And if I had not put it in quick enough, or I had to work an extra 2 hours that week, suddenly I would end up in debt, because that meant that the week I had to anticipate what I was going to earn that week, but my shifts could change. And that's not how MSD is set up. So I ended up in debt. So it's just one hurdle after another. Every time you feel like you're trying to make steps forward, you're actually making steps back.
When Emma did get into a position where she could apply for jobs she was highly qualified for, she hit other hurdles.
A lot of people have stigmas around, I guess, employing a single mum. So I was told I should be grateful for a lot of the positions that I was overqualified for, and that they'd even considered me as a single mum for that, and they would bring in the fact that I was a single mum. I remember having bosses joke that, I'd be better off if I put my daughter into boarding school as soon as I could, so that at least I can focus on my career because I'm a smart girl and it's a shame to waste it, rather than actually trying to provide an environment where I could do that and still have a life outside of work for her.
Do you think that there's been permanent damage from those years, those struggling years?
I think what it's done is it's made me really resilient. It's forced me to be assertive, which has actually been a really positive thing. It's pushed me to actually ask for what I need and to communicate to people. So if I go for a job, I negotiate. I don't see a job as this is the be-all and end-all of it when I'm applying for it. If I get an interview, I will discuss with them, is there flexibility around school holidays? Is there a possibility to do it within these hours? Would you consider this pay rate because of my set of skills that I bring to the table and my life experience? So I think in some ways it's shaped me into a stronger person, but I definitely had to fight really, really hard to get there.
And what did you tell this focus group that would have improved things for you?
So the key things for me were employers. Employers need to consider flexibility. They should definitely consider hiring single mums. We work hard, and where they're afraid of mums working, I guess, part-time or, worried that we're going to take time off to tend to sick children. We're actually really good at looking after our health and our kids because we have to. We can't afford a day off work. So one of the things I prioritised was me and my daughter being really healthy, making sure we had vitamins and had strong immunities, because I couldn't afford to have back-to-back bugs and take that time off work. There was no one else paying the bill, so I needed to show up. So being considerate, finding workarounds for people. If I got a bonus at the end of the year, which actually put me in debt with MSD because I was still partially on a benefit that they hadn't told me about. It was a nice surprise, but that actually turned out to hurt me. So, there's all sorts of other things that you can provide help with that make it easier. You could pay for the internet bill if they work remotely from home and cover that cost for them, which would save them a huge amount per month.
I know there's a lot of things you said that business, in terms of, we talk about business now, that do require a very big change in attitude, a better adaptability, flexibility from employers. Surely we have had now, having had the pandemic, some experience of flexibility working from home. Surely this would now get better.
Surely it would. What we're finding is that even though we have this, national shortage of workers, essentially, this war for talent, it's still very difficult, I think, for a lot of employers to actually think about what flexibility means. And I think for a lot of people that means someone's going to be sitting at home not really working. But as we have seen through the pandemic, that's actually not true.
These senior positions actually can be done in part-time hours. You'd be amazed at what people can get done in 30 hours a week, especially because we're having to try and fill time so carefully. As a single mum, you have to be everywhere at once and doing 100 things at a time. So we usually work smarter, not harder. And so I think it's a real shame and a real disservice that you have these incredible women wanting to come back into employment after having successful careers, or perhaps going through study, or wanting to better themselves and not having opportunities to go into those, or having to sacrifice time with their children and put them into care.
we see that productivity has really increased when we give agency to people to manage their time.
When we trust them.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there are little things too, like a no meetings after 3 p.m. rule. I mean, that makes so much sense. It would not be a difficult thing to implement.
No, not at all. And it's actually really useful for all parents. It's not just single parents that would benefit from that, or sometimes businesses will have, you have to be in the office at 8 o'clock. And now, that is really, really difficult for all parents to be there, and especially so for single parents.
I mean, employers, big companies, they have the green tick, they have the LGBTQ plus tick. They seem to have been able to get their heads around differences in the workplace, but it feels like single parents are kind of invisible. There's no networks for them. Where is the support?
Yeah, that was definitely one of our recommendations that again came out of our stakeholder hui. And it was like, well, yeah, if we can have these other support services, why do we not have support for single parents? And so that's a really easy, quick win for businesses to actually start implementing, even if at this stage, it is actually just a support group for other single parents.
Right.
Or an
just put something in the newsletter.
Yeah. Or an acknowledgement that we understand, we see you. And that was something that was really incredible for us as Project Gender and our iwi partner, Ngāti Kahungunu, was so many women called us and said, thank you. Thank you for hearing us. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to tell our story. No one has ever asked us before, which actually breaks my heart because I think it's 2023 and we haven't asked people what their experiences are and how we as a country can support them.
This strikes me too, this is not simply about solo parents, it's about children. And, how do you feel that New Zealand as a nation treats its children, values its children?
Well, there has been a lot of talk for a long time about child poverty. And that hasn't really gone away. It hasn't gone away, So I would say that actually we're not really valuing our children. We're not valuing the caregiving responsibilities that often fall to women. And if we do really want to make sure that we have a generation of people who are, thriving and able to support an ageing population, then we are going to have to really shift the way in which we think about how we develop policies and systems to be much more child-focused.
Well, and you talk about generations of people. This becomes, by default, intergenerational, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
We're saying that, that they can't start a KiwiSaver account because they have no spare money and nobody's contributing.
Yeah, and first of all, when we got all of the insights back from the research piece, we had, 8 key insight areas, and one of them was access to financial institutions and security. And a lot of that comes down to things like single parents find it really difficult to insure their car, or to have contents insurance, or to have access to KiwiSaver. So with the idea of compounding interest, for example, if you're not able to start paying into your KiwiSaver as soon as possible, it means that you're going to retire into poverty. And we've seen that, the Retirement Commission have done the study about the gendered pay gap, which is sitting at 20%. Plus, when you also load on top of the fact that you might be a single parent on a low income, then you've got the gender pay gap, you've got the motherhood penalty, you have all of these things that make it so much more difficult for our single parent mama in particular to be able to actually kind of get out of this financial trap, essentially. So you're kind of condemning people to a life of poverty and intergenerational poverty.
And yet Emma was the classic case of someone wildly talented, had
Amazing.
A fantastic job, and was pouring coffee and waiting tables just so that she fitted in with the system.
Yeah.
That strikes me as a waste of national talent.
To be honest, I think it is. And I think that this sort of speaks to the stigma piece, where there is this idea that, we definitely heard this from our single parents, that they were kind of naughty girls who should be thankful for anything they got.
That's exactly what Emma said.
Yeah, I mean, this is not an unusual experience, which also then means that if that's the lens in which we are creating policy, then we're not thinking about, wow, there's these wildly talented people. And we know that actually the majority of single parents are university educated. So So it's like there is this massive talent pool ready and willing to work, but we need to redesign the system to be able to do that and to make sure that if people get into paid work, those other support systems, those abatement periods are actually a little bit longer, that enable our single parent whānau to actually be able to build up enough capital.
Give them a head start.
To give them a head start, yeah.
There is, of course, another side to the sole parent equation.
Actually, we need to start holding these fathers to account as well. We need to make sure that as a society, we don't just always assume that women are going to be the ones responsible for this child caring responsibility. We also need to be really leaning into our tāne, our fathers, to be encouraging them and expecting them to be fully participating in their children's lives.
But there would be more split parenting situations now, wouldn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So largely we're talking about the ones who are facing issues are the ones whose dad's gone, died, not taking any responsibility, etc.
Yeah, when you have sole custody of your children, I mean, that is, frankly, they need medals. You know, that is such an incredibly difficult job. And as a society, I think we can actually be much more connected. And as we saw with COVID, we know how to do this. Like, we actually do know how to look after each other. And our recommendations are actually to kind of keep working and leaning into that and actually thinking about, one of our single parents spoke about how she would just love someone to help her fix her letterbox that had a crack in it. Mm-hmm. It's things like that. And so we're really interested in what could happen in terms of, we have this retired population who are really open to, being more involved in the community. And we have our single parents. And is there a way that these two groups can kind of work together? Is there some way that, as neighbourhoods we can be much more connected with each other and actually be able to support each other?
If there's one thing that could come out of this big body of work you've been doing, what would you like it to be?
It would be to remove the stigma around being a single parent. That is the single biggest issue that our single parents face. It's a huge issue. And I think as a country and as New Zealanders, we can do a lot better, and we deserve to do a lot better by these amazing people who are bringing up the next generation of New Zealanders.
That's it for today. I'm Alexia Russell. The details supported by the Public Interest Journalism Fund. This episode was engineered by Flo Wilson and produced by Sarah Robson. Thanks to Emma Donnelly and Angela Meyer. Ka kite anō.